I wanted to just start today with Angela Davis, because I heard her talk yesterday, and I'm sure you are like me. I've heard many, many people speak. And one of the things that was, she is such an inspiration. And I think one of the things that I really appreciated, we talked about last week, that many of us on this call, not everyone, we have some young people here. I know Tony and Angela are young, and we need more young people. But many of us are elder, and I think Hildegard is really a voice and a spirit that's telling us it is necessary that we have elders who share their wisdom, particularly right now with the protests that are going on, which are so inspiringly and well organized by young people. There are so many people in their early 20s that are doing the lion's share of the work of keeping these incredible protests going day after day and week after week now. And we also need elders like Angela Davis, people who have been working for justice for decades. And she said something that I thought was so important that we share in the context of Hildegard, because she has worked her entire life. She was about ready, working as a radical to go to prison and even faced, whatever you call it, death by the government. She has worked tirelessly on incarceration issues, the injustice of incarceration and of Black people that are, so disproportionately in prison. And she said something that's so important when asked about police brutality. She said, the important thing we need to understand is that we cannot live in a culture that uses punishment or anything punitive to solve our problems. And I thought this is such a profound thing, and part of what has really helped me from my own wounds from living in a punitive family and a punitive culture, in punitive educational systems, and punitive kinds of worldviews, was communing with the divine feminine and a God who was merciful and could comfort me like a good mother. And so I wanted to lift this up. And then she said something very profound. She said, we need a lot of feminist theory at this time to help us. And are you all seeing this full screen? Do you see an image of, okay, good. And I was so happy she said this, because when it comes to defunding police and the prison systems, as well as the American military, we do this in order to have enough money to create the things that so many women have always worked for. That is, good schools for their children, health care, local community programs where we can be together. So much of this has been something that feminist theory has helped us understand. And we are at this intersection where we need to be working with everyone. But I just wanted to lift up that we need truth and reconciliation. We need to lift up our elders like Angela Davis and other elderly women who have been working tirelessly for social justice. And that we can look at Hildegard also as someone who was so tremendously marginalized. If you can imagine the patriarchy in the 12th century. And she was incredibly dishonored and marginalized as a young woman. And I think it's Matthew Fox who said in this book that we're reading, is that it is so important for all oppressed people to have self-expression in the arts as a way in which we can heal. And I have experienced this personally. I've experienced this as a minister in churches. I've experienced this just as a member of a family and of a community, of a global community, that we need this. And Hildegard is our North Star of someone who used her self-expression in so many different ways, as a scientist, as a doctor, as a gardener, as a visual artist, as a writer, as a musician. It goes on and on, as a healer, as a wounded healer, as a religious leader. So we can look upon her, I think, to guide us in this. And I hope you all got my email. If you didn't, please let me know, because I had a list that I sent an email to. So if you didn't get that, please let me know. Then you're not on the group email. But I sent you again the picture of Hildegard in her self-expression. Okay, and this is her Pentecostal picture of herself beginning to write. And this was a form of great healing and vitality for her to be able to write her visions and to share them. And she needed support. You know, I don't think Volmar was the monk that was she called him her file because she felt very inadequate about her own education. She did have an education because she grew up in a monastery, but it was not as extensive as if she had been a boy. And she did not speak, you know, the sort of the Queen's Latin, if you will. And she was self-conscious about that in sharing her visions. And Volmar was a monk, which is pictured here, who was the one who was able to sort of write her German and Latin visions in a form. She called him his file. So she filed anything away that was not the best for written expression. One of the things that I hope you have had a chance to look at some of the illuminations. I know for myself, oops, see, it does this where it just jumps around. There we go. Is that the first one? Yes, I think so. Yes, yes. Okay, so in my own transformation and liberation, from my own wounds of self-loathing and self-doubt, which Hildegard had also, was I landed myself, which is an amazing story in itself, in seminary. And I had a profound teacher, Rosemary Redford Ruther, one of the foremost theologians, feminist theologians of our time. And she and feminist theology at the time, and then later ecofeminist theology, changed my life because I found, and I have found this also as a minister, that many of us, in order to commune with God, we need a God that is more like us in order to have a conversation with God. And when we begin to talk to God as if she was a loving mother, for example, or was a woman like us, and of course, God is not a male, God is not a female, but these are metaphors, they're archetypal metaphors, and they're symbols that are incredibly important. Now, William James is a man who wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience over 100 years ago, I think, and he is still lifted up as the first transpersonal psychologist. So his field was both psychology, philosophy, and he wrote about religious experience. And he talks about how it is not better that the subconscious and non-rational are primary in the religious realms. He says it's not better. And he, as Hildegard would say, you know, that the brain and our thoughts and our intellectual life are some of the highest. In fact, Hildegard says they're the highest expression of God. But William James is saying that it is the subconscious, the non-rational, and this is where the world of these kinds of images and symbols in the religious realms, and William James writes, I confine myself to simply pointing out that they do so. That is that this is the primary realm of religion, is subconscious and non-rational. And he just says, I just hold it as a matter of fact. So it's not that he's saying it's better than, you know, intellectual kinds of experiences or other kind of, you know, there's so many different kinds of experiences, but he's lifting up what I have also found, that this world of Hildegard and these archetypal images is it is such a welcoming invitation into divine realms. And I want to lift up that Hildegard was someone who kept saying, but wait a minute, God, I'm not your gal, you know, you got to get somebody else who speaks better, who, you know, I'm just a woman. And we have someone else who had that same feeling, who had visions of the divine feminine, and that is Juan Diego. And this is an image, you see this, everybody? You see the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and you see Caritas, which is the feminine face of God for Hildegard, and you see her in the red face holding the lamb, and then you see that there is a father wisdom archetypal father god even on top of her. She has wings, and she is standing on this snake and this demon. Okay. So this is, I think, and you see below is, there she is. She paints herself in this vision as a part of this experience. So she is having a relationship with this vision. There are many of us. I shared last week that I had a vision of Mother Mary when I was a child, and there's many of us. Saint Bernadette had a vision of Mother Mary in Lourdes in France, and millions of people still go to her pilgrimage in Lourdes, France. There's countless people. Saint Bernadette is another one who was young, she was sick, she was poor, she was uneducated, and she was saying, wait a minute, why me, why me? Same with Don Diego. Don Diego kept saying, no, Our Lady, no, I am not the one to go and tell them to build a church to you. They will not listen to me. And she kept saying, yes, I have chosen you, Don Diego. I have chosen you. And so this is a common theme. I love someone's laughing. It's just wonderful.
Hi, it's Julie. It's me.
Oh, hi, you guys. Welcome. And if everybody can mute, we are midstream here, so we don't get feedback. But welcome. We're delighted you're here. So we have, I think, many people who have had visions, particularly of Mother Mary. And if you're not Christian, you may say, I don't get it. I just don't resonate with this. And I just want to remind you that this is something, it is archetypal. It is much larger than Christianity. A vision of a divine mother who has divinity within her, who gives birth to the divine. In the case of Mary, she gives birth to Jesus, a divine teacher, a teacher that knows and that communes with God. And she is like the earth goddess. And this is the thing about Our Lady of Guadalupe. She is an Indian woman. And the vision that Don Diego had was in the same spot where the Aztec god Tonatzin had been worshipped. And it was the savagery, the brutality of the genocide of the Indian people by the Spanish that came with their Catholicism. And regardless of that, the divine feminine, it is like watching a weed break through concrete. She will not be kept out. So we have now a symbol of and is it the earth? Well, it's archetypal. It's many things. It is God. It is the earth. It is Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus. It is God the Mother, and it is the Mother God. It is all of these things and not one thing. And this is why I think it's so important we think about holograms, because we cannot go into the world of visions or in any of the kinds of non-rational, subconscious experiences of the divine and without an appreciation of this. Okay. I want to say something, and I want you all to really hear what I'm saying. When we start talking about visions, I think people get confused sometimes because I do not believe in a supernatural God. I do not believe that these visions have anything to do with anything supernatural. That is not my experience at all. And it is all about a God who is everywhere. If we just wake up and begin conversation and begin to have a relationship of honor and love. Hildegard is such a teacher in sort of a love of the earth and of nature and love of God. And it is the earth, nature, that rests in God. And it is God that has infused all of nature with life. Hildegard says about the divine, everything that is in heaven, on the earth, and under the earth is penetrated with connectedness and relatedness. It's all about a relationship of love and health and, luring us and begging us and calling us into living our full vitality. Hildegard calls God the living light and the greening force. Now this picture is her first vision, and Scivias, the book that that Matthew Fox refers to, and so does Nancy in her book. It was the first book that she wrote about her visions, and She wrote other books in the course of her life as well about other visions. So in this one, Caritas says, Hildegard speaks for Caritas. This is Lady Wisdom. It says, I am life, whole and entire. All life has its roots in me. All life lights up out of me. I am life that remains ever the same, without end. For this life is God, who always is in motion and constantly in action. So we have to be reminded of the vulnerability that is our tradition in the West. The biblical tradition is that God communicates and comes to the most vulnerable. God is not communing, God is communing. We talked about this church last week. The first person God talks to in the Bible is Hagar, an Egyptian slave girl who was raped by Abraham. And then Abraham and Sarah tried to kill her and kill her son and Abraham's son Ishmael, who then later became a prophet and the head of Islam. This is our ancestry, and this is our history in the West, is that God does not choose those that are powerful, like Brother Trump. He chooses people that are the most vulnerable to communicate with. And, I think this is important, particularly for women, because many women believe that they are oppressed or they're marginalized or this is their experience. And even if we are white and we've been privileged, we somehow seem to walk around with this kind of inferiority complex because we live in patriarchy. And it's so important to know that we can look to Hildegard and we can look to the tradition that was her tradition, the richness of biblical metaphor and symbol. The Bible is filled with visionary prophets like Hildegard, and she talks about them all the time. And we need to access them also. She says, Mother Mary, she says, birthed Jesus, who was a divine being, and Hildegard says she reveals women's true role to birth the divine in the world. And she says of God, God hugs you. You are encircled by the arms of the mystery of God. Hildegard says, God is like a loving mother. And then she says, God is life. And wisdom resides in all creative work. Okay, so she was an incredible theologian. A theologian is somebody who studies God. She communes with God and she shares, and she can be our teacher, because it is my experience that we are dealing with not even half a deck. We have horrific global problems to deal with, and we have got to be able to access all of the subconscious and non-rational realms of religion and of God in order to have the strength to respond. Okay, this is she has so many of these female, and many say Hildegard is the very first woman religious teacher to really claim this idea of experiencing, expressing, and making artwork, making theology, writing books about God as female. Now it's filled with the Bible. The Bible's filled with, God as a mother hen, and God as wisdom, and God as Shekinah. It's not that it's not there, but it is living in patriarchy. Hildegard is just sort of a wellspring that we can go to drink living waters. This is what she calls the synagogues, synagogia, I think it's called in Latin. And she has this vision of this huge figure, and the prophets are in her body. This next one is, these are not, I don't think, in the Matthew Fox book, but that you, I hope, can get and enjoy. But this is a later vision of Mary, and you see, I love this on the bottom. You see how Mary has all of these beings inside her womb. You see this, and she has them coming out of her mouth. It's just this extraordinary fecundity of life spirit. And when so often Mary is wearing a crown. And I think Matthew Fox talks about the archetypal symbols of being crowned as, being of the divine. This is something I hope you've had a chance to look at, this beautiful mandala, and it is of an egg, and not just in female imagery, but in symbols like the symbol of the egg. She offers us these beautiful mandalas that we can meditate on. Very beautiful. She writes, God has arranged all things in the world in consideration of everything else. She says, all creatures are, so to speak, sparks from the radiation of God's brilliance, and the sparks emerge from God like the rays of the sun. She actually changed her mind. This is, I think one of the signs of a genius is someone who can, like Hildegard, say, well, I used to think that the universe was like an egg, but now I've changed my mind. And science, because she is not just an artist and not just an earth mystic, she is a scientist and a medical doctor. She says, I've changed my mind. I don't think the universe is in the shape of an egg. I think it is in the shape of a wheel. And here we have the cosmic tree, and there's many of these beautiful visions that she has of, and there you see her down at the bottom again. So she is involved in this vision. She is not separate from it. It is an experience. And you see all the animals, and you see it's kind of out of focus, but it's a beautiful kind of round, womb-like and beautiful. And the cosmic tree, the tree is a symbol of, inexhaustible life. The tree of life is very often a symbol of the divine feminine, and it, just as in my vision, which I shared with you, I had as a child, Mother Mary was a wooden statue, and she came to life. So the tree and the tree of life is a symbol in many, many cultures of this inexhaustible life of God. I think as a minister, as a Christian minister, as an interfaith minister, I just think more than anything right now, we need to have places where we can connect to God. And God is a loving mother, nothing punitive and nothing all-powerful. A God who embodies and takes care of all people, all creatures. The way a good mother knows how to, that it's not the most important thing for a good mother to do to lift up and honor the most clever and the healthiest in her family. She has to, not that she doesn't love and care for them, she has to go first and take care of those that are sick and in need of her help. This is the motherly response, is to immediately go and care for those that are the most vulnerable. And this is the impulse that somehow we have lost our mother instinct in our world. And I think Hildegard's so interesting that she did not have children herself. So it's not about having physical children, but it's about having this mother instinct repaired if it has gone underground or if it has been wounded. And many of us, did not have the loving mother that I needed and wanted as a child. So it has been in loving my own children and being in a lot of therapy and doing a lot of prayer and having a lot of communion with God, doing a lot of artwork, doing a lot of self-expression, and then doing a tremendous amount of service in the world to others who have these same kinds of wounds and have these same kinds of needs to access love in the universe that can heal us and that can give us vitality to do the hard work of recreating and new visions in the world. So Hildegard, it's a complex. That's why I like to call it a hologram. She's connecting us to God. She's connecting us to nature. she's connecting us to the divine feminine, and she's doing it not only with the visionary and the non-rational experience, she's also doing it in her books of science. She's doing it in her music. So it's, and just as all of you may not want to write music or sing, you may want to paint, you may want to write. Not everybody will have the kind of genius that she has and be able to do all of these things. But it is important that we enter this hologram of Hildegard to be able to be exposed and invited in expressing ourselves. And very often, if we begin to express ourselves, we think we cannot paint. And I know, as a drama teacher and as somebody who's taught art, you know, if you can walk, you can dance. If you can talk, you can sing. So very often we think we can't do things that if we just could try, we might find to be extremely powerful. Hildegard invites us to be visionaries. I wanted to share that I asked my husband, I said, well, what do you think? He's in the class. What do you think people want to learn? And because we're going to be talking about visions. And he said something that was so helpful to me. He said, well, people want to know, how do I have a vision? And I thought I can imagine that. You know, if you haven't had a vision, you want to have a vision. So first of all, we have to say, if you haven't had a vision, we cannot, we need to say, please don't have shame that you haven't had a vision. Because what Hildegard, she talks about these experiences that are experiences where she was wide awake, she was not in trance state, and these are particular kinds of experiences. So if you haven't had one, don't worry about it. You know, I've been doing dream honoring and having dream groups and working with people with their dreams for many decades. And dreams are a kind of vision. At least, you know, we kind of, as we remember them, they have a quality that's somewhat like them. So by the way, there's psychedelic experiences. I know I did psychedelics when I was a teenager. And what's really interesting to me is I had hallucinations, I would call them, or visions on LSD trips as a teenager that were exactly the same as another one of my visions that I didn't share last week that I had in Jerusalem, of the sky opening, and there were rainbow patterns and the scallop patterns. And I had that same experience of the sky opening and these scalloped rainbow patterns when I was on LSD. So I don't understand that. But then I had another image of a polar bear when I was a teenager. And I think now that I'm doing ecologic work, I realize there is no symbol that sort of, I think, reverberates for all of us more about the sixth extinction of life on Earth than the polar bear. We see these pictures, you know, of mother polar bears, and we know about the ice, you know, the ice caps melting, and there's just something that just, you know, just pulls at our heartstrings. These poor polar bear mothers who are unable to survive and to care for their children. There's just something about that. Again, it's an archetypal kind of, it's real, just like Mother Mary was real, just like the earth is real. But it begins to have, it begins to pulsate with a hologram of meaning. We began this Church for Our Common Home with the understanding that it's something that Hildegard was able to do, that we have to name what is evil. We have to be able to tolerate, to watch the news, to see police brutality. It changes us. We cannot just be such candy asses that we just have to say, oh, I can't watch the news, it's just too much for me. Hildegard is calling us. We have to work to be strong, to be able to witness the truth. And part of the truth right now is that we are witnessing the sixth extinction of life on Earth, the only one caused by us humans. And this is a very painful, we cannot do this without loving community. And that's, our church offers that we have a place where we can be together to witness this truth, to share this truth, as well as the truth that, you know, white silence is violence, and that Black lives matters. We have to see all the ways in which there's way too much of our ecologic work has been without the consciousness of racial justice, for example. So we have to strengthen ourselves, as Hildegard did, in loving community, in deep, profound practices of chanting, of prayer, of reading of scripture, and love of community. Because the exploitation of Black people is the greatest extraction system of production of all time. And in order to heal the planet, we must have Black and Indigenous liberation. We must include in our witness of the extinction of life on Earth, the human suffering and the disproportionate way in which people of color are, it's just extraordinary. The amounts of people, for example, people of color that are disproportionately dying of COVID, who are dying of starvation around the world, who are dying in areas like the Delta in India, where they're projecting they're going to have millions of people who will have no home. There are millions of children in India right now because of COVID that are at risk of starving to death because they cannot go get food. So we need to be able to have the strength and to have the loving community to be able to face the very painful truths. I just wanted to offer, I think this is a vision that we have. This is our 12-step program to create an ecologic civilization. My teacher, Kevin Teachers, who's on the call, is Dr. John B. Cobb, a process theologian, who is a internationally famous and important environmentalist. And working with him and adopting this vision, which I would say is the vision of an ecologic civilization. So Hildegard is calling us to be able to re-envision, reimagine, to have visions of what an ecologic civilization, what a loving world of where we take care of all people and all creatures. That will involve our visionary muscles, our visionary capacities, our visioning and our reimagining in community together. So I invite you to come to our church, and we share the truth of our history and habits of dominant over relationships, and to commit to relationships of collaboration, partnership, co-creativity. We do many other things, and we make amends for the harm and alienation from the natural world, idolatry of scientism, rationalism, and with transdisciplinary connection of religion, psychology, ecology, and art, etc. Okay, we have a vision. We have come here to Oregon to build a church to pray for the earth. And this is just Jim Hubble, a wonderful architect and artist. And I have no idea what our church is going to look like, but I hope it is as beautiful as this beautiful building that Jim Hubble has made. I've worked with him, and he is an extraordinary artist. And I hope we can employ some of the beautiful kinds of mosaics that Jim does in a lot of his buildings. And I had the good fortune of taking Unitarian Universalist groups down to Tijuana to a school called Esperanza, which means hope. It was serving the poorest children in Tijuana. And what the mothers wanted for their children, they wanted a school, and they wanted a school for the arts. So a friend of mine, Christine Brady, and Jim Hubble have created this incredible school, and it has ballet, it has art, and these are people that understand we have to do self-expression, we have to create beauty as oppressed people in order to heal. So I hope, as I invited, I hope you will join us. And we have to be working locally, but it's so interesting. I think people are doing interesting work all over the planet. And this Zoom and this internet is this incredible interconnected web that connects us, so we can connect with people who are doing social justice work and ecologic work, and we can be connected with small local groups all over the world to get inspiration, to get vision, and to give and receive support. Okay, if Hildegard, a woman in the 12th century, can build a monastery like this, then you and I can indeed create locally a place that supports all people. Now, this, again, I mentioned this last week. She's a Benedictine nun. The Benedictines, they are Christians who are saying their king is Jesus, a poor man who says, we are here to do unto the least of these. These Benedictine, it was a Benedict, these are communities that took care of the poor, they took care of the sick, they were, and still are, beacons of hospitality. And she created this incredible, she had this vision. In fact, it was a visionary experience that drew her to this land. And she had a lot of challenges. So don't think, oh no, I can't do it. I just don't, whatever I am. You can. She was told by the people in the monastery and her elders that she was not allowed to go and build another community. And she was persevered, and she did. Okay, there are many people in history who've had visions. And I just want to lift up many people who are never in a religion, and people sort of, there are people like Muhammad, who started Islam. It was all about a vision. And I want to remind you, Christianity was started in the vision of the resurrection. It was the holiest moment and the most important archetypal symbol of Christianity is a story that love is stronger than death. And there was this visionary experience that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had, Jesus from the other side after he had been tortured and murdered, and Mary Magdalene. And it is not a coincidence that we silenced Mary Magdalene and we have steadily silenced the whole tradition of visions. Because Mary Magdalene is the symbol. She was the one, like Hildegard, who had the first vision. And visionary experience, whether it's from people who are like Jesus, who have passed over, it's very difficult to say, how that isn't a different kind of vision than this. This is a picture of me in the bottom right-hand corner. I went with my beloved husband, Walt, to the Mary Magdalene caves in the south of France, where she is said to have escaped, and she went to live a contemplative life in caves there in the south of France, and was the first to bring the gospel message to France. Now, on the other three pictures, I just want to share, we have been lifting up St. Francis of Assisi as kind of the Christian ecologic saint. And I think we need to remember St. Francis came a long time after Hildegard. So I would say that St. Francis was, I'm sure, affected and inspired by Hildegard. And I think that's so important as women that we remember. And it was so important for me when I was there in Assisi, Italy, that I had an amazing experience there. And this picture of Jesus hanging on the cross, that was an icon. It's large. It's like the life-size Jesus. It's now hanging in a big cathedral. And it was originally in a monastery that St. Francis gave to Clare. It turns out, if you don't know about her, Clare of Assisi was also a saint, and she is, again, like Hildegard, someone that we have just not known about. We have not learned our own history, whether it's about slavery and the incredible brutality of white supremacy. We have not learned that history. We've also not learned the history of women in history that have been written out of the books. At any rate, I had an experience there where I was at St. Clare's Monastery, and I had to join a tour of, I don't know, maybe 20 people, and there's small rooms in the monastery, and they were speaking German, I think, and I don't speak any German. And so I was just there for the ride, and I knelt down in this room because it was kind of claustrophobic. There's so many people, and I was sort of on my haunches on the ground, and right in front of me was this stone, and I looked at this stone, and suddenly I was overcome with feeling, and I just started weeping and weeping and weeping. I didn't really understand it. And then someone later came up to me and they said, I saw you had a really profound spiritual experience back there in that room. And I said, well, I guess I was just overcome with feeling. And they said, well, that was the room, and that was the place, that rock that you were looking at, where St. Francis of Assisi had his calling from God. And God said to St. Francis of Assisi, go rebuild my church. And I thought that was pretty amazing. Now they've taken that and it's no longer in a little church, it's in this huge cathedral. So St. Francis went and he took God literally. And this is the problem of literalism, because he started building churches. And he built this little beautiful church that's up here. And inside is some beautiful paintings, and this is another one. Mother Mary, of course, had visions. This is the vision of the Annunciation that she had. And then you can see what's funny about this little church that St. Francis built. Then we have this huge cathedral that was built around it. It's very comical. But then it was sort of like one day St. Francis kind of went like, oh, I could have had a V8. It was like, oh, I'm sorry, God, I took you literally. You didn't mean actually build buildings. You meant rebuild the church in a more spiritual way. So I just offer that to you because it's so important that we don't take our visions and our dreams literally. They have a hologram. They come with a multiplicity of meanings. Okay. Let's go on. And these are just some pictures of some of the things that we've done with Church for a Common Home. And I want to just invite you all, and I want to hear whether any of you have been doing any work in the streets. Oh, by the way, this was up on the right-hand corner. The reason why that was in the front page of the San Diego Union, and you can see these were really scary guys. This was a civil disobedience that we did about the United States government kidnapping and torturing families and separating families. It's just a horrific thing. So when I was in San Diego, I was involved in protest in the streets about that. These guys were scary. You can see them, right? They were kind of scary guys. But I really do believe that we are protected and that in those situations. This I wanted to share with you is a protest that I went to day before yesterday here in Dallas. Now, moving to Oregon, our vision was to be able to have land so that we could grow our own food and that we could build a church to pray for the earth. And we certainly couldn't afford to do that in California. And several things conspired and seemed to lead us here. Dallas, where we live, has been a headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan. Now, it's one of many in Oregon. Oregon is a big white supremacist state historically. They outlawed slavery, but they also outlawed, even having African Americans be able to walk on the street. This supposedly, I'm not sure of this, but I've heard that the sundown laws are still on the books in Dallas. And this is where we live. This was a protest I just happened to find, and it was a protest that was led by four very competent and well-organized African-American men from Salem. And they came to Dallas and worked with some local people. They were a very young group. I'd say a lot of teenagers and people in their young 20s. And I just happened to drive by, and so I stopped my car. We walked to the town courthouse, and I've done a lot of protesting, but I'll tell you, I found it very inspiring to be with people who are so young, who probably this was 99% of them was their first protest ever. And that this is, I am very inspired by the incredible genius of the young people and the tenacity that are in the streets at this time. And then this, Walt and I just, on the right, these are the first green Took us a long time to get set up, but we are now seeing the first green sprigs in our biodynamic farm, which we've called the John Cobb Farm after my teacher. So I want to make a plug for this hologram idea for all of you. We need to be working transdisciplinary, not just interdisciplinary, we need to include all of the disciplines. We need to be working trans-religiously. And you see, this is a picture of an artwork of a dream that someone shared at a dream circle. And he's given my permission to share this. And so much, I love this, is that Mother Mary is there with Ganesh, a Hindu god, elephant god. And I think that, you know, in our, in this realm of the subconscious, the non-rational realm of visions and dreams, that we are coming together in our trans-religious symbolic life together on this planet. And that we all, this dream was about, the elephants went down to the shore, and they were very angry with the whales because the whales had told them that they had given up, that they had decided they could not survive anymore. They were going to be going extinct, and they just didn't have the energy to fight. And the elephants came down to the edge of the water to say, "We object, you cannot give up. Where there is life, there is hope." So I just offer this as the kind of hologram of interspecies, transdisciplinary, transspecies, transreligious, transdisciplinary kind of hologram that I invite all of us to be a part of. Okay, we invite you to come. We have a dream group. We have different things. And I also want to invite you to the Poor People's Campaign. You probably have had a lot of inspiring sources in the last couple of weeks, but Reverend Barber is an African-American leader that I admire so much, who I wanted to just give a shout out to, because he has lifted up where Martin Luther King Jr. left off in 1968 when he was assassinated by the United States government. He was planning this Poor People's Campaign on Washington. And it is going to be happening virtually on June 20th. So join me and join Church for a Common Home on the Poor People's Campaign to Washington. And I thought this was of particular interest to this group, that they are having a, on Monday at 12 noon, so that's 9 a.m. Pacific time, there's going to be an art build, including tips for making artwork. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that, because I think some of you might be interested. Okay, and Walt and I have a counseling center. We invite you to come and talk with us. We can't do any of this alone. We invite you to come to our church because we cannot do this work of looking at our own inner wounds and bearing witness to them. We cannot look at the wounds of the planet without community support and one-on-one support. So we have time now to just open it up for conversation. And I think I will close this out. Let's